On a Tuesday morning in late April, with the soil finally dry enough and the calendar already burning red, Travis Kellerman stood at the edge of his field and watched $100,000 worth of opportunity disappear into the mud. The planter was down, not struggling, not limping, down. A $280,000 precision seeding machine, 47 feet wide, equipped with individual row clutches, wireless section control, integrated fertilizer application, and a touchscreen display that could tell you the population of every seed placed in every inch of every row, was sitting at the northeast corner of his best ground with its frame twisted, 2 hydraulic cylinders weeping fluid into the black earth, and a central drive shaft that had sheared clean through somewhere inside the gearbox. The dealer was 4 hours away. The parts were on back order. The agronomist on the phone was using words like catastrophic timing and replant penalties, and the forecast showed a rain window closing in 72 hours. Travis had planted corn on this ground for 11 years. He knew what a late start cost. He knew the yield drag of every day past the optimal window. He did the math in his head while he stood there, quietly, grimly, the way a man does when the numbers are too ugly to say out loud. Let me tell you about Travis Kellerman. At 39 years old, Travis ran Kellerman Ag Solutions out of a steel building he'd had custom fabricated with his name on it in letters large enough to read from the highway. He farmed 6,000 acres across 3 counties, ran a custom application business on the side, and had recently been featured in a regional farm magazine under the headline, The Future of Midwestern Agriculture. He drove a diesel pickup that stickered at $78,000 and wore boots that cost more than most men's dress suits. He was not arrogant in the way that announces itself with volume. He was arrogant in the quieter, more durable way, the kind built from a decade of being right more often than the people around him, of making bets on technology and precision that had paid off every single time. He believed in data. He believed in horsepower. He believed that if a problem existed, a large enough machine or a large enough check could solve it. He had financed the new planter in February. He had traded in 2 older units to do it. He had nothing else in the shed capable of putting seed in the ground at a meaningful scale. The dealer's service manager called back at 10 in the morning with the official diagnosis: minimum 5 days to source the gearbox assembly, minimum 2 days to install and calibrate. 7 days. Travis stood with the phone against his ear, looking at his field, and said nothing for a long time. "Travis, you still there?" "I'm here," he said, and that was all. He spent the rest of that morning calling everyone he knew. Neighbors, custom operators, 2 counties over, co-op contacts, a guy he'd heard about in Iowa who ran a fleet of older planters for exactly this kind of emergency. The Iowa guy was already booked. The custom operators were running their own ground. 2 neighbors offered smaller planters, 4-row units that would take 3 weeks to finish what he needed done in 3 days. He thanked them and kept calling. By noon, he had exhausted his list. He walked back out to the broken machine and stood beside it the way you stand beside something you've lost, not because standing there does any good, but because you don't know where else to put yourself. That was when he heard it. Not a modern engine sound, not the clean, high RPM hum of a turbocharged diesel or the electronic whir of a precision drive system. This was something older, a sound with more iron in it, a rhythmic clanking and a low, settled chug that seemed to come up through the ground before it came through the air, the sound of something that had been doing exactly what it was doing for a very long time and had no particular intention of stopping. An old tractor came up the gravel road along the field edge, and when Travis Kellerman looked up, he squinted the way a person does when what they're seeing doesn't quite match anything in their existing catalogue of reference points. Let me tell you about Eldon Marsh. Eldon was 78 years old and had lived within 4 miles of this field his entire life. His family had broken this ground in 1911, working it first with horses, then with a little grey Ferguson, then with a succession of tractors that grew larger and more capable with each generation, until Eldon, who was the last of his line still farming, had quietly stepped back from row crops in his late 60s and rented his ground to a younger neighbour. But he had never left. He still rose before 5. He still walked his fence lines. He still kept his shop in perfect order, every tool on its hook, every grease fitting wiped clean after every use. He was not bitter about the changes in agriculture, the consolidation, the technology, the economics that had made small operations like his difficult to sustain. He had watched it all with the patience of a man who has seen enough seasons to know that the land itself changes very little, even when everything around it does. Eldon had driven past Travis's field the previous afternoon and seen the planter sitting crooked. He had gone home, thought about it through the evening, and this morning had backed something out of the far end of his equipment shed that hadn't seen daylight in quite a while. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever known you could do something that everyone else had already decided was impossible? Not because you were reckless or naive, but because you possessed a specific piece of knowledge, something old, something earned, that the people around you simply didn't have. That quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't require an audience, that doesn't need to announce itself. Do you know what that feels like? Because that is exactly what was sitting behind Eldon's eyes as he pulled his old tractor to a stop at the field's edge and climbed down with the unhurried ease of a man who has never once moved faster than the situation actually required. Travis walked over. His field manager, a young man named Cole, trailed behind him. "Morning," Eldon said. "Morning," Travis said. He glanced at the tractor, glanced at the implement behind it, and looked back at Eldon. "Help you with something?" "Saw your problem," Eldon said. "Thought I might be able to help." Travis looked again at the equipment. The tractor itself was a 1956 Oliver 88, painted a red that had faded to something closer to the color of old brick, the hood repainted at some point in its life and not quite matching the rest. The exhaust stack showing the honest patina of a machine that had been used and used and used. Behind it, mounted on a toolbar that had been fabricated and refabricated over the course of several decades, were 2 rows of planting units. 2 rows. Travis had 47 feet of row units sitting broken in his field. He kept his face neutral for a moment. Then Cole made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a word, and Travis allowed himself a slow smile. "Eldon," he said. He knew the old man by name, the way you know everyone in a small county. "I appreciate you coming over, I genuinely do, but I've got 1,200 acres of corn to put in, and about 60 hours of window to do it. 2 rows isn't going to—" "2 rows isn't what I brought," Eldon said. He tilted his head toward the road, where, coming up the gravel at the same patient pace, was a second outfit. And a third. The sound arrived before the details resolved. That same iron-heavy chugging multiplied, the air taking on a low, mechanical texture that Travis couldn't quite identify. Let me tell you about what came up that road. The second tractor was a 1952 John Deere Model A, green and faded gold, driven by a man in his mid-70s named Gerald Foss, who had been Eldon's neighbor, and by the particular arithmetic of rural life, his friend for 60 years. Behind Gerald's tractor was a 2-row planter that had last been used commercially in 1987, which Gerald had kept in the back of his shed because, and this was his explanation when anyone asked, "I just never got around to taking it to the scrapper." The third outfit belonged to Eldon's nephew, Ray, who was 53 and operated a small hay operation, and who had arrived driving a 1961 Farmall 560 with a two-row unit that he had spent 2 evenings over the past weekend quietly servicing on his uncle's request. 6 rows, 3 old tractors, 3 men who had been farming this county since before Travis Kellerman's parents had met. Travis looked at the convoy. He looked at Eldon. He looked at Cole, who had stopped smiling. 6 rows, Travis said. I need 120 acres a day to make this work. 6 rows at... He glanced at the Oliver's tires, estimating. What, 4.5 miles an hour?
We'll run it at 5, Eldon said. Ground's right for it? Travis did the math. At 5 miles an hour, 6 rows at 30-inch spacing, you're moving just over 3.5 acres per hour per outfit, about 10.5 acres per hour total, say 80 acres in a working day, accounting for turns and fills. Not 120, not even close. I don't think the numbers work, Travis said, and there was still, even now, even in his desperation, a note of condescension in it that he probably didn't hear himself producing. Eldon reached into his jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. He opened it and held it out. It was a hand-drawn planting plan, field by field, working order, turning patterns, fill station locations. I've been thinking about your ground since yesterday afternoon, Eldon said. If we stage the fuel and seed at 2 points I've marked, we cut the dead time in half.
We run 1 outfit through the night. I'll take that shift. I don't sleep much anyway. Gerald's son is coming at 2 in the afternoon with his own 2-row to make a 4th outfit, 8 rows. We can plant your priority acres in the window you have. Travis stared at the paper. The field plan was precise. The turning patterns were optimized in a way that, and this was the detail that caught him, accounted for the specific shape of each field, the wet corner in the east quarter, the slight grade on the south end that affected drainage and planting depth. Eldon knew this ground. He had farmed beside it, or some version of it, for the better part of 70 years. You'd run through the night, Travis said. It was not quite a question. Done it before, Eldon said. And what do you want for this? Eldon folded the paper and held it out. I'm not doing it for money. You've got a crop to get in. This county runs better when its farmers don't lose their crops. He paused. There's a small agricultural museum over in Harwick that's been trying to restore an old seed corn sorting machine. They're about $400 short of what they need for the parts. If it works out the way I think it will, maybe you make that donation in your mother's name or your own. Whatever feels right to you. If it doesn't work, you've lost nothing but a day. Cole looked at Travis. Travis looked at Eldon for a long moment, and there was in that moment a calculation happening that had nothing to do with agronomy.
All right, Travis said, and his voice came out with less certainty than he'd intended. Let's see what you got. Let me tell you about those planters. The units that Eldon and Gerald and Ray ran were not relics in the sentimental sense. They were not decorative. They were functional machines built to exacting standards for a very specific purpose, maintained by men who understood every part by hand because they had replaced every part by hand at some point across the decades. The seed plates were matched to the seed size. The press wheels were properly adjusted for the current soil conditions. The seed tubes were clean. The depth was set and verified with a ruler, not a display screen. There was no telemetry, no population mapping, no wireless connectivity. There was seed, soil, depth, spacing,
and the practiced eye of a farmer who had been calibrating planting equipment since the 1960s. Let me tell you about the next 3 days. Gerald's son arrived at 1:30 on that first afternoon with his own 2-row, making their total 8 rows across 4 tractors. Eldon had staged the seed tender and the fuel trailer at the two field access points he'd marked on his hand-drawn plan, and the convoy moved through Travis's priority fields with a systematic efficiency that was, in its own way, more impressive than anything a GPS-guided system had produced on this property. There was a rhythm to it, the sound of 4 old tractors working the same ground, the kind of sound this county had heard every spring for 100 years, had forgotten for a couple of decades, and was now, improbably, hearing again. Travis watched the first few rounds from the field edge. He was a man accustomed to watching large equipment work, and he had a specific aesthetic sense about it. He appreciated scale, speed, the visible demonstration of capacity. What he was watching now was none of those things. It was small and slow and quiet, in the way that steady, competent work is always quieter than impressive work. But the rows went in. Field by field, the seed went in the ground. Eldon ran his shift through the night, as he'd said he would. Travis drove out at 2 in the morning to check, found the old man working the north field, with his headlights on, moving at the same pace he'd been moving at 4 that afternoon, and felt something he couldn't immediately name. He brought 2 cups of coffee from a thermos and sat on the hood of his pickup, while Eldon made his turn at the field end, and they did not talk much, and what they said was not important. What was important was the coffee, and the dark, and the sound of the Oliver working in the headlights. At the end of the second day, with the rain still 20 hours out, they had planted 94 acres of Travis's most critical ground. By the end of the third day, working into the early evening with the clouds already building in the northwest, they had 161 acres in, more than Travis had believed possible when he'd done the math at the field edge 3 mornings earlier. The rain came in at 9:30 that night. Travis stood on his porch and listened to it, and for the first time in 72 hours his chest unknotted by about half. The triumph was not dramatic. There was no whistle blown, no crew erupting in cheers. There was Gerald shutting down his tractor under the shed overhang and saying to no one in particular, "That'll do." There was Ray throwing an empty seed bag into the back of his truck and checking his watch. There was Eldon, last to quit, pulling the Oliver in behind the others, climbing down and pressing one hand flat against the hood of that old tractor, the way a person touches something they trust completely. Travis Kellerman had stood pale and quiet in his field 4 days earlier. He stood that way again now, but for an entirely different reason. The next morning, Travis drove over to Eldon's farm. It was early, barely past 6, but the light was already on in the shop. He knocked on the frame of the open door and went in. Eldon was at his workbench cleaning a seed plate, working a small brush through the cells with the patient focus of a man performing a task he has performed 10,000 times. "How did you do that?" Travis said. Eldon looked up. He set the seed plate on the bench. He didn't rush to answer the way some people don't rush because they aren't sure what they think, and the way other people don't rush because they know exactly what they think and want to give it the space it deserves. Eldon was the second kind. "Those machines were built for work," he said. "Not for speed, not for data, not for covering ground fast so you can get to the next job. They were built to put seed in the ground correctly at whatever speed the ground required. And the men running them, Gerald and Ray and me, we've been setting planting depth since before that fancy monitor in your cab was a patent drawing. We don't trust the screen, we trust the feel. We know when something's off because we can hear it and feel it. And we stop and fix it." He picked up the seed plate again and looked at it. "Your machine broke because it was doing too many things at once and something couldn't handle the load. That happens. Complexity has a cost." He set the plate down. "Simple things break too. But when they break, you fix them with what you have, and you keep going." Travis was quiet for a moment. "I should have laughed less and listened more when you pulled in," he said. "You didn't know," Eldon said, "and that's different from not caring." Travis nodded. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. "There's a check in there for the Harwick Museum," he said. "It's more than $400. I figure they might have other parts they need." Eldon took the envelope without opening it. "I'll see it gets there. And I want to pay you and Gerald and Ray." "Gerald and Ray did it because I asked them and because it's the right thing to do," Eldon said. "You can thank them. That's the payment they'll want." Travis started to say something else and then didn't. He looked around the shop. At the tools on their hooks, at the oil cans lined up on the shelf, at the 1948 single-row corn planter hanging on the wall like a map of a world that hadn't disappeared so much as receded. "Is that the original?" he asked. "The one from your father's time?" Eldon looked at it. "Grandfather's," he said. 1948. He paid $140 for it, which was a serious sum in 1948. Used it for 20 years. My father used it for another 12 on the garden ground. I've shown it to every young farmer who's ever been curious enough to ask." He paused. "Nobody asks much anymore." Let me tell you about the years that followed. Travis Kellerman did not become a different man overnight. Change doesn't work that way, not in fields, not in people. But the specific arrogance that had lived in him, the certainty that scale and technology were synonymous with wisdom, had been altered at a cellular level by those 3 days in April. He began asking questions he hadn't asked before, particularly of older farmers who had been in his county long enough to know its soil and its weather and its particular stubbornness in a way that no satellite or sensor had yet captured. He made his donation to the Harwick Agricultural Museum, and then 2 years later made a larger gift to fund a working demonstration program. Old equipment, operated by older farmers, showing younger ones what certain machines could do and why they had mattered. He told the museum director truthfully that it was the best several $1,000s he had ever spent in an agricultural context. Eldon Marsh became something of a local legend, which embarrassed him, so people were careful not to say it to his face. When Travis's precision planter was repaired and returned, it worked beautifully, and Travis ran it for another 7 years and was grateful for it. But he kept Eldon's phone number at the top of his contacts list, and he called it for reasons other than emergencies. Sometimes just to ask what the old man thought about the spring, about the soil, about whether the rain felt right. Gerald Foss passed away 4 years later in the spring, which is the right time for a farmer to go. His funeral was attended by most of the county, including Travis Kellerman, who sat in the 3rd row and thought about an old man running a 2-row planter through a dark field at 2 in the morning for no reason except that the crop needed to go in, and he knew how to do it. Let me tell you about the passing of Eldon Marsh. He died on a Wednesday in October at 84, in the same farmhouse he had been born in. His son, Daniel, who had moved back to the area 15 years earlier after a career in manufacturing, had been maintaining the equipment with his father in the last years, learning, finally, what there was to learn. The Oliver 88 was in the shed, serviced and running. The old planters were racked and ready. The 1948 single-row corn planter had come down from the wall in the shop and been cleaned and oiled, hung now in the barn where Daniel could see it from the doorway. Eldon's funeral was a major event in that county. Travis Kellerman was there, older, quieter, standing in the back of the church because he had arrived late and there were no seats left. He found he could not tell whether the tightness in his chest was grief for the old man or gratitude to him, and he decided, standing there, that it was probably both and that this was appropriate. Daniel inherited everything. The knowledge, the machines, the philosophy. He was not his father. He was a different kind of man, shaped by different decades. But he had absorbed enough of what Eldon knew to be useful in a specific way. He could look at a piece of old equipment and tell you what it was for and how to make it work, and he could do it without condescension and without sentimentality, the same way a good mechanic talks about an engine. Let me tell you about a morning 8 years after that. Travis Kellerman's son Marcus was 26 years old and farming the family ground with the confidence and impatience of a man who has grown up watching success and believes he understands its source. He was running a newer planter, not the original broken machine which had been traded in years ago, but a newer model, wider, smarter, more capable by every measurable standard. When a hydraulic fitting let go in the main frame and fluid began sheeting down across the toolbar, and the machine shut itself down the way expensive precision equipment does when it detects a fault it cannot self-correct. Marcus stood at the edge of the field, rain window closing, dealer 4 hours away, parts on back order. His father drove out and stood beside him and looked at the broken machine and said nothing for a long moment. "Call Daniel Marsh," Travis said. Marcus looked at him. "Who?" "Eldon's son. He's about 6 miles north."
"Call him." Travis reached over and put a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. "Tell him you need help getting seed in the ground and that your father sends his respects, and that he's sorry it took another generation to need asking." Marcus made the call. He was standing at the field edge, looking at his broken machine, when he heard it, a rhythmic clanking, a low, settled chug coming up from the road, the sound of iron moving at the speed of iron, unhurried and patient and absolutely committed to the work. Some things don't become obsolete. They just wait for people to remember why they were built.